The heroic fiber, having the courage of our confusions. The word hero falls too easily from our lips these days. Reverend Richard Gilbert is more interested in what poet John Burroughs calls the heroic fiber, which is more spiritual than physical and much more closer to home.
The words hero or heroine come easily to our lips these days, very easily, perhaps a little too easily. War heroes, of course, but also the first responders, certainly the teachers of Newtown, Connecticut. These come easily to our lips, and they deserve all the adulation we may give them. However, right now I'm much more concerned with what the poet John Burroughs calls the heroic fiber, which is more spiritual than physical and much closer to home. I'm thinking about us, members of the liberal religious community. Now, my text is from Gary Trudeau's Doonesbury, a cartoon. I wish I could portray it on the wall, but you'll have to do with my description. Mark Slackmeyer, former campus revolutionary and turned radio commentator, is in a studio watching TV. Fox News. We report, you decide. Mark says, that has to be the most cynical slogan in the history of journalism. Chase Talbot III, formerly Mark's significant other, a conservative Republican who is co-host of their radio show, their NPR show, All Things Being Equal, retorts, drives you crazy, doesn't it? You know why? Because you liberals are hung up on fairness. You actually try to respect all points of view. But conservatives feel no need whatsoever to consider other views. We know we're right, so why bother? Because we have no tradition of tolerance, we're unencumbered by doubt. So we roll you guys every time. Mark hesitates and says, actually, you make a good point. To which Chase responds, only a loser would admit that. Well, this is a caricature, to be sure. Some of my best friends who are conservatives, both political and religious, are very open-minded. And there are, among my best friends who are liberals, those who are very closed-minded, even dogmatic. However, if you take a broader view of today's political and religious landscape, I think you will see just a kernel of truth in Doonesbury's cartoon, the Doonesbury cartoon. Take reproductive justice, for instance, an issue played out very dramatically this past week on the 40th anniversary of the controversial Roe v. Wade decision of the Supreme Court. Republicans and probably a few Democrats are trying to make it difficult, if not virtually impossible, for women to get abortions. They've tried to defund Planned Parenthood across the country, Texas being notable, but also across the country, and deny Title X funds for Planned Parenthood. Ironically, defunding the very programs which are the best guard against unwanted pregnancies and therefore the best way to reduce abortions. But that's ironic, so I guess no point in making that any more clear. But for them, abortion is clearly a mortal sin. On the other hand, take one Unitarian Universalist minister I know who served on the clergy consultation service on problem pregnancies back in 1970, just before New York State liberalized its abortion law, making them more legal. He counseled more than 50 women during that period and experienced women who struggled with excruciatingly difficult decisions about terminating a pregnancy. He was up to his neck in moral ambiguity, legal uncertainty, and very tough choices. Interestingly enough, his Republican Assemblywoman, Constance Cook by name, was instrumental in passage of this liberalized abortion law. And quite interestingly, another Republican, George Michaels of nearby Auburn, cast a deciding vote for this legislation, a profile in courage, I would say, as a member of the Republican Party, and he lost his next election. Neither of them would make it in today's Republican Party. Well, I know these things very well because I am that clergyman, that UU minister. It was a tough time. I was back in Ithaca in those days. It was a tough time spiritually and morally. Abortion remains for me a knotty issue with which I still struggle. I articulated my view in a recent letter to the editor of the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Perhaps some of you might have seen it. I challenged a news item that had appeared in the paper a few days earlier that said church groups continue to oppose the abortion bill. And I wrote, in part, as president of Interfaith Impact of New York State, a coalition of Unitarian, Universalist, Reformed Jews, and Protestants, I know many churches and other religious groups do support the Reproductive Health Act. And I went on to point out that roughly the same percentage of Roman Catholics believe in women's right to choose as does the public at large. And then I concluded, I respectfully encourage each religious group to encourage its own adherents to follow its teachings while allowing other people their constitutional and moral right to choose. Well, like Chase Talbot III, many members of the religious right have no such ambiguity. Some fundamentalists even blamed the Superstorm Sandy on Northeastern support for reproductive justice, marriage equality, and having taken God out of the schools. If only God were back in the schools, it just wouldn't have happened, they say. Wayne LaPierre of the NRA, National Rifle Association, attacked President Obama's gun control program by saying, absolutes do exist. It's the basis of all civilization. Evidently, the Second Amendment is one of his absolutes. These folks have what Mark Twain called the calm confidence of a Christian with 4 aces. Now, Jane Fonda puts it in words that are right on the money. I love this quote. The predominant paradigm is a fundamentalism that has no room for complexity, ambiguity, or mystery. No room for complexity, ambiguity, or mystery. Now, on the other hand, there are dogmatists of the left as well. For example, the late Paul Kurtz was summarily ousted as director of the Center for Inquiry in Buffalo, a humanistic think tank, really. And he wrote this of his detractors, who had essentially kicked him out. I considered them atheist fundamentalists. And while I agree with much of what Richard Dawkins writes in criticism of organized religion and Christian theology, I do find him a bit dogmatic in that he picks out very traditional Christian straw man ideas of God and attacks them, disregarding the very progressive Christian theology, the process theology, and other kinds of theology that, while I may not agree with, still cause one to think and are certainly not dogmatic. And yet he takes this easy old man with a long beard in the sky God to debunk, and not many Christians I know believe in that God anymore anyway. Well, from whatever perspective, this absolute certainty takes all the air out of the room for any kind of dialogue. And where do you stand in all of this? While the religious right is united in the surety of their convictions, we of the religious left appreciate the complications of the issue and don't want to impose our views upon others. As a result, one of our greatest virtues, the right to disagree agreeably, weakens us in public dialogue. And when there are so many confused people out there, insecure economically, socially, politically, theologically, what can we expect? Will they sail with those who are, well, a little uncertain, we try to get it right, but we're a little uncertain, or those who absolutely know they have it right, like Chase Talbot III? As Mark Twain says, again, a lie travels around the world before the truth gets its boots on. And in this virtual age of the internet and all the rest, that he was very prophetic 100 years ago. That these uncertain souls of whom I speak will repair to a group that admits humility before ultimate truth, that exudes a cautious confidence and speaks tentatively, seems improbable. It is the church of perpetual curiosity versus the church of eternal certitude. Our history suggests that dogmatism is dangerous. Unitarianism was given its first institutional expression in 16th century Transylvania. There, King John Sigismund and his the court preacher, Francis David, produced the Edict of Torda, a proclamation of religious freedom throughout the land. It was a very dogmatic time, and so this was a major breakthrough. Tradition has it that at the Diet of Torda, where this was proclaimed, the Trinitarian Milius said to David, the heretical Unitarian, if I win this debate, you will be executed. David replied, and if I win this debate, you and everyone else in this land will be given complete religious freedom and the tolerance due to every child of man. Luckily, David won, but the victory was very temporary. And we also remember that it was the religious dogmatism that burned our heroic Michael Servetus on the stake in Geneva in 1553. John Calvin was the one who perpetrated that crime. Servetus's crime was denying the Trinity. Pretty serious business in those days. So we have an inherent suspicion of any theology that purports to unravel the mysteries of life and unscramble the riddle of existence. Creeds and dogma simply don't fit our experience. The religious issue here is illustrated by one of my favorite cartoons. It's a frank and earnest cartoon. And these two comic figures are atop a mountain examining a book. And Frank asks, if those are the ultimate answers to the riddle of existence, why are they in a loose leaf notebook? Good question. Good question. That's why I do this. So we use the metaphor of the loose-leaf notebook, loose-leaf Bible, to suggest that revelation is not sealed, in the words of one of our wonderful hymns. Then there's poet James Weldon Johnson. Tells a story of a preacher who, after reading a rather cryptic passage, took off his spectacles, closed his Bible, slammed it down on the table, and said, "Brothers and sisters, this morning I intend to explain the unexplainable, find out the indefinable, ponder over the imponderable, and unscrew the inscrutable." I, for one, am not that confident. There's a wonderful song in the musical, "You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown." Interestingly, written by a Unitarian Universalist, but might well be a caricature of us. You may be familiar with it. "You're a good man, Charlie Brown. You have humility, nobility, and a sense of humor that is very rare indeed. You are kind to all the animals and every little bird. With a heart of gold, you believe what you are told, every single solitary word. You bravely face adversity. You're cheerful through the day. You're thoughtful, brave, and courteous. You're a good man, Charlie Brown. You're a prince, and a prince could be a king. With such a heart as yours, you could open any door. If only you weren't so wishy-washy." A frustrated, insecure public does not abide the wishy-washy. So what do we know for sure? Religious communities are supposed to provide the answer to that basic question. But our faith is always in the religious quest. We celebrate the authority of truth known or to be known. As my Bible prof put it, let your findings determine your feelings, not the other way around. In our unease with absolutes, we have followed really the scientific tradition when it kind of applied it to our theological inquiries. Physicist Niels Bohr once told his students, "Every sentence that I utter should be regarded by you not as an assertion, but as a question." Max Born, Nobel Prize-winning physicist, said, "I am convinced that ideas such as absolute certainties, absolute precision, final truth are phantoms which should be excluded from science." And physicist Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle has been a hallmark of the postmodern era, and we Unitarian Universalists very, very much in the postmodern era, aren't we now? So in using this scientific method spiritually, we have been at the very edges of mainline religion. We fairly burst with pride to hear the words of Martin Luther, prideful heresy really, when he said, cornered by a persistent young theologian with a question, "Where was God before the world was created?" Luther snapped, "He was building hell for such presumptuous, fluttering, and inquisitive spirits as you are." Hey, that's us. We are those presumptuous spirits, aren't we? Worrying about extinguishing the flames of current issues rather than about buying fire insurance for some eternal hellfire. That has been our charm and our challenge. This fierce individualism that accepts no creed, but painstakingly builds its own credo, its own "I believe." We continually repeat the question famously stated by the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke in his letters to a young poet. Do not seek the answers. Live the questions now. And do we live them? Liberal religion has always exhibited more a conversational than a declamatory tone. More interested in pursuing truths known or to be known than in assuming we already had it. We have learned to live with and even embrace theological, moral ambiguity. We gather together on a Sunday morning or other times during the week to share both our ignorance and our wisdom because we know that no one of us is wise enough to make it out there by ourselves. The poet Rumi wrote, somewhere beyond all the areas of rightness and wrongness, there is common ground. I'll meet you there. At best, we manifest what poet John Ciardi called the courage of our confusions. The courage of our confusions. We learn to live meaningful lives without knowing the final answer to the ultimate meaning of human existence, if there is one. We navigate throughout life without believing the secret of existence has been given to us by our church. We act with conviction even when all the facts are not in, and they're never all in. We move in religious ambiguity much of the time, still open to new truth. Such a position, however, requires the heroic fiber. It's not easy. But is this enough? Is it enough to liberate ourselves from creedal or dogmatic burdens? Or have we been too certain of uncertainty? I think so. You may remember that Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the wall of the Castle Church in Wittenberg. I'd been there and seen them. And he said famously at his heresy trial, "Here I stand, God help me, I can do no other." Well, I don't have a hammer, but I have a few theses. Mercifully for you, not 95. But I'd like to tack them, tentatively at least, to the door of this congregation. Fewer in number than Luther, but no less fervently held. I am grateful to be a guest of existence, knowing I am not God, but that there is that of the divine in every person. The ground in which I walk is holy. The cosmos is my home, and I am part and parcel of it. I have a right to be here. And while the complexity of the universe is too great for my comprehension, I marvel that I am able to comprehend even a small bit of it. And I at least know that I need to take care of that holy ground. We are all more human than otherwise. My task on earth is to build bridges, not walls, realizing that I cannot navigate this journey alone. I have need of loving comrades, and they have need of me. When all is said and done, I would rather be than not. I am privileged beyond all being and beyond all telling to celebrate this brief interval of life, this brief interval between birth and death. This life, to me, is worth the living despite all the vicissitudes that fate can throw at me. In a word, life matters. My life matters, and so does yours. We are the meaning makers. Meaning is not found somewhere out there or up there in the stars. It is created right here in the depths of our own souls. And I prefer my own tentative answers to the questions of meaning rather than those frozen in creed and dogma. There are no cosmic lifeguards. What becomes of this earth and its people is squarely in my hands and in the hands of those with whom I work. I must be what I want to see in the world. Life is always unfinished business. It is ultimately messy. Some problems cannot be solved. I must learn to embrace the limits of life and love it still. We must learn to be gentle with each other. No one of us can possibly know another's hurt or pain. We all need to become wounded healers. To be is to be for others. We must both savor life and save it. Our mission then is to grow a soul, to love and to be loved, and to help repair the world. Well, these affirmations are the result of living my life in a do-it-yourself church with a build-it-yourself theology. They render my life both livable and meaningful. The question I leave you with is, what are yours? What are your theses that you would tack or pound to the wall? And do each of us have the heroic fiber to live out those convictions in the shadow of ultimate uncertainty? The answer, my friend, is not blowing in the wind. It is growing in the heart of each and every one of us. So be it.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.